Welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Aram, I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often.
Throughout my long life, I've witnessed countless expressions of confidence from various species across the galaxy. The Zotharians have their chest-thumping displays, the Kaladimes their elaborate victory dances, and even the weird Riker show their assurance through intricate guttural sounds. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to the simple human phrase, "I got this." Those 3 words, so casually spoken, carry more weight than any ritual I've ever encountered. I should know. I've seen them change the course of history 3 times during my long life. Standing in my son's tree home that evening, I couldn't help but reflect on this as I watched my grandchildren resist their inevitable bedtime. The artificial lighting followed the natural grain of our living tree dwelling, creating warm pools of amber that were distorted across the walls. Our temperature control system worked quietly, maintaining the perfect balance between the technological comforts we'd adopted and the natural elements we'd preserved. Our nest was an example of both our tradition and innovation. The synthetic fibers we'd carefully woven provided structure, while the sacred ancestral leaves passed down through generations added cultural significance. Family scent markers, subtle but distinct, permeated the materials, creating a space that was uniquely ours. The children's sleeping area was particularly well thought out, divided into 2 distinct spaces that reflected their emerging personalities. Lodir's space near the window was cluttered with his prized collection of spacecraft parts, each piece carefully labeled and arranged. The soft glow of his sleep monitoring technology reflected on those parts, almost lost among the traditional blessing symbols carved into his headrest. His sister, Sidara's space near the trunk, was a sharp contrast, her carefully preserved flower collection creating splashes of color that seemed to absorb the natural moonlight. My own perching spot, worn smooth by years of use, gave me the perfect vantage point to watch over both of them. Usually, their parents would occupy this groove, but today's trade negotiations had taken them off-world, leaving the children in my care. My late mate's blanket, still carrying traces of her scent after all these years, draped over the edge of my perch, providing comfort as I surveyed the nest. The evening was growing late, with all 3 moons visible through the reinforced transparencies. Outside, the wind was picking up, suggesting an approaching storm. Inside, the remains of our evening meal had been cleared away, leaving only the cozy atmosphere of a family home at rest. Or at least it should have been at rest. "But I'm not tired," Lodir protested, bouncing on the edge of his sleeping space, his emerald feathers ruffled with excitement. His sister Sidara was more subtle in her resistance, meticulously reorganizing her flower collection for the 3rd time that evening. "Children," I said, trying to keep the fatigue from my voice. "Your parents were very clear about bedtime rules." "Tell us about the humans first," Lodir pleaded, his crest feathers rising with enthusiasm. "About their spaceships and your adventures," Sidara chimed in, abandoning all pretense of organization. "Please, grandfather." I could see they'd been planning this assault. Their crests were displaying the formal patterns of respect, a cultural gesture they'd clearly practiced. They moved in perfect coordination, their eyes wide with fake innocence. "Tomorrow we'll be busy," I reminded them, though I could feel my resolve weakening. "Your parents expect—" "We promised to go to sleep right after," they chorused, their synchronized plea accompanied by a perfect execution of the 3rd gesture of solemn vowing. "Just one story?" Sidara asked, her crest feathers rippling in the traditional pattern of scholarly interest. "3 stories," Lodia countered quickly. 3 very short ones." I felt my own crest rising in response to their enthusiasm. They knew they had me, They could see it in the way my feathers ruffled. With a sigh that carried more amusement than exasperation, I settled more comfortably into my perch. 3 very short stories, I agreed, watching as they immediately dropped all pretense of resistance and settled into their proper listening positions, bodies still but crests raised in attention. 3 times I heard humans say those words. I got this. Their excitement was obvious, their crests fully extended in anticipation. I adjusted my position, letting my wings settle more comfortably against my sides. The artificial lighting dimmed automatically, sensing the storytime atmosphere, while the wind outside provided a perfect backdrop. Each time was different, I continued, watching their rapt expressions. Each time taught me something new about humans, about courage, and about the many forms confidence can take.
"Are you scared?"
Sidara whispered, her crest feathers trembling slightly. In the first story, yes, I admitted, but not for the reason you might think. You see, I was young then, serving on someone else's ship. I paused, letting the anticipation build. It was the first time I ever saw a human stand up to a Sodorian warrior. Their gasps of delight told me I'd chosen the right opening, and as the storm gathered strength outside our cozy dwelling, I settled in to share tales of the most remarkable species I'd ever encountered. The wind's whistle through the branches grew louder, creating an almost musical accompaniment to my thoughts. I took a moment to gather my memories, feeling the weight of years settling around me like my mate's old blanket. The children waited, showing remarkable patience for once, their crests still raised in perfect attention posture. "You know," I said softly, "I've never told anyone the full story of these encounters. Not even your parents have heard all 3 tales together." I shifted my weight, feeling the familiar groove of my perch. Each one happened at a different time in my life, when I was a different person, but they're connected, like the 3 moons above us tonight. Sidara's eyes darted to the window, where indeed all 3 moons hung in the darkening sky, their light creating shifting patterns through the storm clouds. Lodir's crest feathers moved in a way that showed his excitement. "The first tale," I continued, "comes from my youth, when I was just a junior crew member on someone else's ship. Back then, I thought I knew everything about space travel, about trading, about life itself." I chuckled, the sound mixing with a distant roll of thunder. I was wrong about most things, but especially about humans.
"Did you think they were scary?"
Sidara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, adjusting my wings. "I thought they were weak. Physically, they are indeed weaker than many species. No claws like ours, no natural armor like the Sodorians, no venomous spines like the Rikur. Just soft, strange-looking creatures with hair only on their heads."
"But they're not weak,"
Lodir interrupted, then quickly lowered his crest in apology for speaking out of turn. "No, they're not," I agreed, nodding in approval at his knowledge. And I learned that lesson very clearly the first time I heard those words. I got this. Those 3 simple words that changed everything I thought I knew about strength and courage. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the nest in brilliant white for a moment. In that flash, I could see my grandchildren's faces perfectly, their expressions a mirror of the same wonder I had felt so many years ago. As the thunder rolled over us, I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to match the hushed atmosphere of the storm. "Let me tell you about the first time I heard those words," I said. "It was during the great cargo ship era," I continued, settling deeper into my perch. "I was just a junior crew member then, not yet a captain. Our vessel was the Star Whisperer, one of the mixed species merchant ships that were becoming popular despite traditional prejudices. I paused, remembering those early days with a mixture of nostalgia and embarrassment. I was the only avian on board, surrounded by various furred species who found my feathers as strange as I found their pelts. Each of us had our roles, our territories on the ship, our own ways of doing things.
What did the human look like, Grandfather?
Lodier interrupted, his crest feathers twitching with curiosity. His name was Michael, I replied, and he was strange to look at, like all humans. Skin without fur or feathers, except for that patch of dark hair on his head. The rest of the crew was fascinated by him, though we quickly learned that humans have very specific ideas about personal space and touching.
Did the others touch his hair?
Sidara asked, her eyes wide. Only after becoming friends, and only with permission, I explained. Humans taught us much about respect and boundaries. Though they seem soft and vulnerable, they have an inner strength that commands respect. We learned this lesson well at the trading post. My voice grew more serious as I continued. It started as a routine unloading day. The port was busy, the air thick with the clouds and smells of a dozen different species conducting business. None of us expected trouble. Not until we saw them, the Sidorians.
Were you scared when you saw the scary alien?
Sidara whispered, pulling her wings closer to her body. The Sidorians were impressive, I said carefully, choosing my words. Massive creatures with thick fur and rippling muscles, their eyes sharp and calculating. They had a fearsome reputation, and for good reason. When they challenged our captain over a perceived slight, we all knew what it meant.
Did they really challenge the captain?
Lodier asked, practically bouncing with excitement. They did, I confirmed, my crest rising at the memory. A life-or-death challenge, as was their way. Our captain, a respected Vulperian trader, was terrified, and rightly so. None of us knew what to do. The stakes were impossible. Either our captain would die, or we'd face the shame of backing down, which would have ended our trading rights in that sector.
And then what happened?
Both children asked in unison, their crests fully extended. That's when Michael stepped forward. He was so calm, so composed. I'll never forget his words. I got this. Just that. No grand speeches, no displays of bravado. The captain looked like he might faint from relief, though he tried to maintain his dignity in public.
Tell us about the duel,
Lodier demanded, his talons gripping his sleeping mat. The duel grounds were simple. A cleared area behind the trading post, marked with traditional Sidorian symbols. The weapons were kinetic blasters, ancient things that required both skill and honor to use properly. The rules were simple. One shot each, fired simultaneously at the signal. The nest fell silent as I described the scene, broken only by the continuing storm outside. Michael stood there, perfectly still, his strange, hairless face showing no emotion. The Sidorian warrior towered over him, all muscle and fury.
Did the human speak?
Sidara's voice was barely a whisper. No, I said, matching her hushed tone. He just stood there, calm and focused, his hands relaxed at his sides. When the signal came, I paused, noting their complete attention. It happened so fast that many missed it. Michael's draw was like lightning, his shot precise and perfect. The Sidorian's blast went wide, while Michael struck exactly where he intended.
Did the Sidorian die?
Sidara asked, concern evident in her voice. No, I lied. And that was the most remarkable part. I made up a story fitting their age. Michael had done something even more impressive than winning. He'd found a way to satisfy honor without taking life. the Sidorian's rank badge shattered. A deep disgrace, but one that could be redeemed through future acts of valor. It was a solution that no one had even considered possible. I let my words sink in. A lie about the badge shattered, watching their expressions shift from tension to relief. The storm outside had begun to ease, as if matching the resolution of the tale.
Tell us another!
They pleaded in unison, their earlier sleepiness forgotten. I adjusted my position, feeling the familiar comfort of my perch. Outside, the storm had settled into a gentle rain, its rhythmic pattern against our dwelling creating a soothing backdrop. Sidara had pulled her favorite flower preservation tool closer, absently turning it over in her hands as she processed the story. Lodir's crest feathers were still fully extended, his eyes bright with lingering excitement. Michael taught me something important that day, I continued, my voice softening with reflection. But it wasn't just about dueling or honor. It was about the way humans face challenges. Directly, without hesitation, no ceremony. That lesson stayed with me through the years, influencing many of my decisions.
Is that why you started hiring humans on your ships?
Lodir asked, showing an unexpected insight that made my crest rise with pride. Exactly. I nodded, pleased at his perception. Though it wasn't a common practice then. Most avian captains preferred traditional crews, keeping to our own kind. But I'd seen firsthand what humans could bring to a team. I paused, remembering those early days of my captaincy. Which brings me to the second story.
Was it another fight?
Sidara asked, her crest flickering with both concern and curiosity. Not exactly. I chuckled, adjusting my wings. Though there was certainly danger involved, this story is about a different kind of courage. The kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of, even when everyone else thinks you're wrong. Lightning flashed again outside, softer now, more distant. The artificial lighting in our nest had dimmed further, creating the perfect atmosphere for storytelling. Both children had unconsciously shifted closer to my perch, their bodies relaxed but their crests still alert. Well, I said thoughtfully, I suppose I should tell you about the second time I heard those words. By then, I was a captain myself, proud owner of my first ship, though the bank still held most of the ownership rights. And I had a human navigator named Samantha. She wasn't just any navigator. Like Michael, she had that uniquely human quality that drew others to her, though in a very different way. Where Michael's confidence had been physical, ready for direct confrontation, Samantha's was quieter, more analytical, but no less powerful. I continued, watching my grandchildren's attentive faces in the dim light. The years after that first encounter with Michael had been good to me. I'd worked my way up through the ranks, finally achieving my dream of captaincy. My first ship wasn't the largest or the newest, but she was mine. Or would be once I finished paying the substantial loans I'd taken to acquire her.
Did you have a big crew, Grandfather?
Lodir asked, his crest feathers twitching with curiosity. Not as big as some, I replied. But I was proud of every member. You see, I'd done something unusual for an avian captain. I'd specifically sought out a mixed species crew, including humans. Other captains thought I was mad, breaking with tradition like that. But I'd learned valuable lessons from my time with Michael.
Why did you want humans?
Sidara's question came with a slight tilt of her head, a gesture she'd inherited from her mother. Well, that brings me to Samantha, I said, my crest rising slightly at the memory. She was my navigator and one of the finest I've ever known. She had a way of reading space lanes that seemed almost magical, finding routes that others missed. We'd worked together for 3 years by then, and I'd come to trust her judgment completely. I shifted on my perch, gathering my thoughts. But times were hard. The ship payments were steep and competition for cargo contracts was fierce. Sometimes we had to take risks. Calculated ones, mind you, to stay profitable.
Was it dangerous?
Sidara's voice carried a note of concern. All space travel is dangerous, I explained carefully. The key is knowing which risks are worth taking. I took pride in my decision-making, in understanding our ship's capabilities and my crew's abilities. We never took foolish chances, but sometimes the line between courage and recklessness can be very thin.
Tell us about that human phrase,
Lodier demanded, practically bouncing in his sleeping space. Ah, yes. I nodded, my voice dropping slightly. It started with what should have been a routine delivery. We'd picked up a valuable cargo of medical supplies, and our route took us past a sector known for predator activity. Now, normally we'd avoid such areas entirely, but Samantha had plotted a course that she assured me would keep us safe.
Were you scared?
Sidara whispered. Not at first, I admitted. But when our sensors detected a predator fleet moving to intercept us, I began to question her judgment and even my judgment. They were positioning themselves perfectly. 3 ships ahead, 2 behind, closing in like they'd been waiting for us. I could see no way out.
What did Samantha do?
Lodier's anticipation was obvious in his voice. She looked at the tactical display, completely calm, and said those words. I got this. Before I could respond, she'd physically moved me aside and taken control of the helm. The next few minutes, I paused, my crest rising at the memory. Well, I've never experienced anything quite like it.
Did they catch you?
Both children asked together, their crests fully extended. Samantha threw our ship into maneuvers I didn't even know were possible. She took us into a gas giant's atmosphere, a suicidal move by any normal standard. The predators followed at first, confident in their superior numbers and firepower, but Samantha... I shook my head in amazement. She threaded us through storms that would tear most ships apart, using the planet's storms to mask our signature, while simultaneously plotting a course through the chaos.
How did you escape?
Lodier pressed, his eyes wide. She brought us out on the far side of the planet, in perfect position for a clean jump to safety. The predators never saw exactly how we did it. They were too busy trying to survive the atmospheric forces themselves. We saved our cargo, our ship, and our lives, all because Samantha knew exactly what she was capable of. The children sat in awed silence for a moment, processing the tale. Then, predictably, they chorused,
Tell us another one!
I considered the late hour, noting how their energy remained high despite the time. Well, I said thoughtfully, there is one more story. It's quite different from the others, a tale about the strangest kind of courage I've ever witnessed. The storm outside had quieted to a gentle pattern, creating a constant noise that should have been soothing. Instead, it seemed to energize the children further, their crests still fully extended in excitement.
Please, Grandfather,
Sidara pleaded, her voice taking on that special tone she'd learned worked so well on her parents.
Just one more. The best one is still to come,
Lodier added quickly, showing surprising insight.
Isn't it? You always save the best for last.
I chuckled, adjusting my wings. They knew me too well. This next tale, I said thoughtfully, is quite different from the others. It's not about fighting or flying or outsmarting predators. It's about the strangest kind of courage I've ever witnessed.
Is it about love?
Sidara asked suddenly, her crest feathers rippling with interest. Her correct guess caught me off guard, making my own crest rise in surprise. How did you know?
Because you got that same look Father gets when he talks about Mother,
she replied with the simple wisdom of children. Lodier made a show of disgust, but I noticed his crest feathers remained fully extended, betraying his interest.
Is this a mushy story?
It's a story about the kind of courage it takes to stand up in front of everyone and make a complete fool of yourself, I said, watching their confusion with amusement. And yes, it's about love, though not in any way you might expect.
But there was still an I got this moment,
Lodier asked, seeking reassurance that this tale would connect with the others. Oh yes, I nodded, my crest rising at the memory. Perhaps the most important one of all. You see, it happened at a royal auction in Zotharia, where a young human named Jake taught me that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in facing danger, but in facing embarrassment. Noticing I had their attention, I began. The Zotharian royal auction wasn't just any market gathering, I said, my voice taking on a more theatrical tone. By then, I commanded a fleet of 5 merchant ships with 20 human crew members among my staff. It was quite a change from my earlier days of trying to pay off a single vessel. We were there as honored guests with 3 supply contracts pending. At least, that's what I thought was at stake.
What brought you to the auction, Grandfather?
Lodier asked, shifting closer. The war had been costly for the Zotharians, I explained, my tone growing more serious. Their male warriors were all gone, their treasury emptied. The royal family was selling everything they could, palace artifacts, trade rights, even, I paused for effect, their youngest princess in a political marriage.
What is a political marriage? What did the princess look like?
Sidara's questions came mixed together. I clicked my beak thoughtfully. A political marriage is an alliance, not a union of the heart. It binds families, factions, or even worlds for strategy rather than sentiment. It's an alien concept to us. I changed the subject roughly. Well, to avian eyes, she was rather strange-looking, as all mammals are, I said diplomatically. Pink-patterned skin, delicate clawed hands, and those peculiar mammalian features that seem to appeal to their kind. The only beauty I saw in her were her blue eyes. I paused, remembering. Even I could see the sadness in them.
She didn't want to get married?
Lodier's voice carried genuine concern. She didn't want to be traded like cargo, I explained softly. Particularly not to someone of another species who saw her merely as a political asset. Her tears were dampening those blue eyes. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself as her family urged her toward the auction stage. And that's when things got interesting.
What happened?
Sidara whispered, her crest feathers trembling. The bidding turned violent. A Chaldean diplomat was throwing credit chips like weapons, while a Rikur warrior literally overturned tables in his enthusiasm. The guards were struggling to maintain order, and the princess... I shook my head. She was crying harder with each aggressive display.
Didn't anyone help her?
Sidara's distress was evident in her voice. That's when I noticed Jake, my young human guard. He was standing with the rest of my crew, watching the chaos unfold, but there was something different about his expression. He gave a quick nod to his fellow humans, and then... I paused, my crest rising at the memory. He said those words. I got this.
What did Jake do?
Lodi's excitement had returned in full force. He walked straight up to the stage, took the announcer's microphone, and cleared his throat 3 times, loud enough to make everyone stop and stare. Then he did something that, to this day, I still can't quite believe.
Did he fight them?
Lodier asked eagerly. No, I chuckled. He started what humans call roasting them. He turned to the Caladium delegation and said, "You're so ugly, your mirrors file for divorce." The entire hall went silent. Then he looked at the Ricor warrior and declared, "You're so broke, you can't afford the sea in protection."
But wouldn't that make them angry?
Sidara asked, her crest feathers quivering. "Oh, they were furious," I confirmed. But Jake kept going. "The Caladium females are so ugly, they have to look for mates in other species." Then to the Ricur, "You're so desperate, you might actually consider it." And you know what happened? Both children shook their heads, completely enthralled. The princess laughed. Just a small hiccup at first, but then a full, genuine laugh. That's when both species charged the stage at once.
That's not good!
Sidara cried, hiding behind her wings.
Skip the fight, grandfather! No, keep going!
Lodia urged, his crest rising with excitement.
Did he fight back?
He tried, I continued, watching their opposite reactions. But the Caladium was 3 times his size, and the Ricor's claws were razor sharp. Jake took a heavy punch to the ribs. We heard them crack from where we stood. Still, he managed to joke about the Ricor's mother, even as blood ran down his face.
Yes!
Lodia bounced in his sleeping space.
That's so brave! That's so stupid!
Sidara countered, though she'd lowered her wings to watch. By the time we pulled him free, he had 3 broken ribs, a swollen face, and claw marks down both arms. But you know what he did? He looked up at the princess with his one good eye and winked.
That's horrible!
Both children protested.
We don't like this story.
Ah, I raised a wing to quiet them. But you haven't heard the end. That midnight, when Jake was in the medical bay having his ribs sealed, our intruder alerts went off. A hooded figure had somehow made it to our airlock. When the hood fell back, I paused dramatically. It was the princess.
She came for him?
Sidara asked, her crest rising in delight. She did. She looked at Jake's battered face and asked him to take her away from it all. And that's when I said the words myself. I got this. We hid her in our medical supplies, created false manifests, and made a clean escape from the system.
Did they live happily ever after?
Both children asked in unison. Well, I chuckled, my crest rising in amusement. Not right away. You see, at first, the princess was more interested in escaping her arranged marriage than in Jake himself. She didn't particularly like the idea of being with someone of another species. But over time, as they traveled together on my ship, something changed. Jake's kindness, his humor, his way of making her laugh. Slowly, she began to see him differently. They sent us messages every year after that. Their growing love is proof of what can happen when someone has the courage to make a complete fool of themselves for the right reason, even if the reason changes along the way. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the gentle sounds of the dying storm outside. Sidara had unconsciously been arranging her flowers in a pattern that resembled a wedding circle, while Lodir's talents traced abstract patterns in his sleeping mat.
Can we meet them someday?
Lodir asked hopefully, his voice carrying the first hints of sleepiness.
Do they have children?
Sidara added, her own voice growing softer. I felt my crest feathers droop slightly, though I maintained my warm tone. That's not possible for different species, I said gently. But their story, like all the stories I've told you tonight, carries something important. Something about humans that I've never seen in any other species.
Because they're brave?
Lodir suggested, fighting back a yawn.
Because they love differently?
Sidara offered, her crest feathers rippling with remnant emotion from the tail. Both of those things, I nodded. But there's something more, something about those 3 words, I got this, that tells us everything we need to know about humans. The children settled deeper into their sleeping spaces, their earlier resistance to bedtime finally fading. Yet their crests remained partially raised, showing they were still listening, still wanting to understand. You see, I continued, my voice growing softer to match their increasing drowsiness. When a human says those words, they're not just expressing confidence, they're making a promise. And in all my years among the stars, I've never seen any species keep their promises quite like humans do. The artificial lighting had dimmed to its lowest setting, matching the natural darkness outside. The storm had passed completely now, leaving only the soft sounds of night creatures in its wake. Both children were fighting to keep their eyes open, their crests slowly lowering despite their best efforts.
Tomorrow,
Sidara murmured.
will you tell us more about humans? And their promises?
Lodier added, his words slurring slightly with sleep. I adjusted my late mate's blanket, feeling its familiar comfort. Yes, I said softly. But first, let me tell you the most important thing I learned from all 3 stories. You see, little ones, I said softly, watching as their eyes grew heavier with each word. When humans say, I got this, they're doing something remarkable. They're not just expressing confidence, they're making a promise to the universe itself. A promise that they'll see things through, no matter the cost. Sidara's crest feathers dropped slightly as she fought against sleep.
But, Grandfather, they all did such different things.
Exactly. I nodded, my own crest rising gently. Michael's courage was in facing physical danger. Samantha was trusting in her skills when everyone else doubted. And Jake, I chuckled softly. Jake's courage was in making himself look foolish for something he believed in.
But they all kept their promises.
Lodier mumbled, his eyes barely open. Yes, they did. And that's what makes humans so special. They don't just believe they can do something. They make themselves do it, simply because they said they would. It's a kind of magic that no other species I've encountered quite understands. The artificial lighting had dimmed to its lowest setting, matching the peaceful darkness outside. The storm had long since passed, leaving only gentle sounds of night creatures in its wake.
Can we meet them someday?
Sidara asked again, her voice thick with approaching sleep. I felt my crest feathers droop slightly, though the children were too drowsy to notice. They've all gone to the great beyond now, I lied, avoiding any trouble with their parents. But their stories live on, and sometimes that's the most important thing we can do. Share the stories of those who taught us what courage truly means. Looking at my grandchildren, finally drifting off to sleep, I could see the future stretching out before them like the star lane Samantha used to navigate. Perhaps someday, they too would find themselves in moments that required that special kind of human courage. And when they did, I hoped they would remember these tales and understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say, I got this, and mean it.